this is the big opportunity to get some of the things done that
okay. Now, we're just preparing the live stream, which is starting, and I'm going to do one of the security procedures now, which is to mute everyone, and those that will be speaking, Alan, Cynthia, Danny, and later on Robert, will need to unmute yourselves, and because you're co-hosts, you can do that now. So we've got Alan back.
No.
And we've got everybody back.
Danny back, all good. That's an important procedure we do. We have had, I'm sure it won't happen tonight, but on previous occasions we've had an organised Zoom bomb attack on our event, and it's happened, I think, twice or two or three.
Couple of times, yeah.
Okay, so we should be
almost there
on the other forum. Just check it on this. We'll be good to go in about a minute. Yep, everything's working.
Okay, we're ready to go. We've still got people on the way in.
I think you can start your introduction, Alan, anytime after now.
Okay, all right. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome as usual. Welcome to our regulars and any new people this week. Also, welcome to those watching on Facebook. And to anybody listening to the audio replay, which is broadcast every Thursday at midday and Sundays at 4 p.m. on J Air Community Radio in Melbourne, that's FM 88, or everyone else can listen at j-air.com.au. My name's Alan Friedman, Vice President of the Australian Jewish Association, and you will also have seen David Adler, President of the AJA, as well as our guests for tonight, Professor Danny Ben-David, and Cynthia Roklovsky from the Shoresh Institute. This week, we're talking about the Israeli education system and asking the question, is it in crisis? Danny's going to give us a presentation for about 30 minutes and then we'll take questions. And if you've never been to one of these sessions before, we ask you to raise your hand electronically if you want to ask a question, and you do that down in the reaction icon at the bottom of the screen. You can place written questions on the chat function, and Robert Gregory, our Director of Public Affairs, will read out some of them during question time. Okay, so education has always been a key component of Jewish culture. And when Israel was created, education therefore played an important role into its development as a modern, vibrant, thriving country. But as our guest tonight says, this all changed in the mid-1970s because of a dramatic shift in the country's priorities. Fast forward to today, nearly half a century later, and it may be that a populist veil of perception over substance poses a direct threat to Israel's future. To explain what this all means, Professor Danny Ben-David is an expert in the field who founded and heads the Shoresh Institution for Socio-Economic Research and is also a senior faculty member in the Department of Public Policy at Tel Aviv University. His academic research has placed him during the 1990s as amongst the 10 most cited economists in Israel and among the 1,000 most cited academic economists in the world. And he has twice received Tel Aviv University's Best Teacher Award in the social sciences. Danny, welcome to Australia via our Zoom session, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Alan, and thank you, David, and thank you, AJA, for hosting us today. We really appreciate it, and many thanks for organizing this, and of course, to Greg Rosshandler, my good friend and supporter of the Shoresh Institution, who initiated everything and helped make this happen. So many thanks to you all. My name is Dan Ben-David. I'm a macroeconomist at Tel Aviv University. I specialize in economic growth. In other words, the analysis of long-run trajectories, which is basically what I'm going to speak about today. And education plays a major role in that effect. Together with Professor Eyal Kimchi, a Hebrew University microeconomist specializing in labor, we established the Shoresh Institution a few years ago. And our Director of Strategic Partnerships, Cynthia Ruklowski, is joining me here today. She'll say a few words afterwards. We created Shoresh because we fear for the future of Israel. Now, to you, those of you who are familiar with the startup nation, it may seem a bit weird, but and it seemed weird to me as well when I happened across the data for the first time several years ago. I didn't believe my eyes, because I'm a part of the first world Israel, the universities, the high tech, and so on. And we know that there's another part of Israel. We just don't know what's happening there, how fast it's growing, and what its influence is. But basically, there are two countries in one. And while every country has its challenges, some of Israel's root, Shoresh in Hebrew, that's where the name of our institution comes from, some of these have existential implications. And while most of the issues that I'm going to focus on are not new, they are rarely looked at together, and especially not within a long-run perspective that I'd like to share with you today. So let me hook up here and take you for a little journey. I understand that some of the people will be listening rather than seeing, so I'm going to ask your forgiveness that I'm going to also explain what you're looking at for those who can't see it. So Shoresh, again, it means root, it's a source. This is what we're about. We're trying to get down to the bottom, peel away the superficial discourse, the shallow discourse, and try to understand what exactly is it that we need to focus on to ensure that Israel survives. And my focus here today is going to be on the mix between education and demography, and a look at where we're headed as far as all that's concerned. The reason is very simple. When we look at income levels, the standard of living is generally measured by income per capita, or GDP per capita. Israel was on a very, very steady path almost from the beginning. From 1950, we were born in 1948, country was born. And you can see it's a very steady path. This is what growth paths look like. This is from 1950 until the eve of the Yom Kippur War, 1973. We had recessions. In fact, in the 50s, we were rationing food. We were so poor because we were gathering people from all around the world with only the clothes on their backs. There wasn't even enough food. And yet we were growing at a phenomenal pace. The slope of this path reflects the rate of economic growth. A year goes by, incomes rise. If they rise by a lot, you're going to get a very steep path. How unique was it? Well, if we compare Israel to the 8 countries that were most similar to us in the early 1950s, 4 immediately above and 4 immediately below, you can see the average annual growth rates in Israel were high. We were among the leaders of the group of countries that had similar incomes to us. Had we continued along this path, we would basically be one of the wealthiest countries today in the world. Instead, the thing that determines growth paths are national priorities, and ours changed after the Yom Kippur War. It was a shock from which we basically never recovered. We changed our priorities. We moved to a new path, which those of you who can see it here, a much shallower path. It too is very steady. These are like straight like rulers, and yet it's much slower. So if we do the same kind of experiment, compare Israel in the early 70s to the countries that were similar to us then, how fast did they grow? How fast did we grow? Then those who can see that we've moved closer to the bottom of the pack. We've become a very slow growth country compared to countries that are similar to us. If we narrow this down even more, instead of looking at GDP per capita per person, not everyone works. Some are children, some are elderly, some are sick. It's much more accurate to look at GDP per hour worked. That has a name in economics. It's called labor productivity. If we compare Israel to all of the nations in the OECD, and the reason I'm looking at the OECD is because while it includes many countries that are not developed, basically all the developed countries are there. And as is shown in the graph here, Israel's labor productivity, the amount that we produce per hour, is below basically all of the relevant countries that we are competing with, that are drawing away our best and brightest. Not only is our labor productivity low, this despite the fact that we have a startup nation status, that informal status, which I'm going to get back to in a second. Not only is our labor productivity low, we are falling further and further behind the leading developed world countries, the G7, the US, Canada, England, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan. The gap between them and us has grown. They've grown almost a half percentage point more than us. Their productivity has grown almost a half percentage point more than us every single year on average, which has a cumulative effect. The gap between them and us has grown more than threefold over the past nearly half century. This is not a graph that we have another 40 years of, because the bigger the gap between these countries and Israel, the more difficult it will be for Israel to keep its best and brightest within the country, because the gap is rising between what we can get abroad and what we can get in Israel. And you cross the threshold of more and more Israelis who are willing to leave. Now, many people in Israel have this thing, oh, well, we are today, I don't know if you know, but we have 9.5 million, almost 10 million people. So what? I mean, 1 million people aren't going to get up and leave. What I want to show you here is that 1 million people don't have to get up and leave for Israel to be in a major, major problem. In fact, if we look at high tech, okay, this whole startup nation business, only 9% of our workers are employed in high tech, but those guys alone are responsible for over 50% of our export. So on the shoulders of a very, very small group rests most of our cutting edge economy. Our health system, it's a big system, but who determines the quality of the health system and how many people are there? Those are the physicians. The number of physicians that we have relative to the entire adult population, 25 and up, that's just over a half percentage point, 0.6%. Who teaches them? The physicians, the engineers, the computer sciences. That's at our research universities, primarily. Some study abroad, most are in Israel. How many senior faculty do we have in our research universities? As a percentage of the adult population, that's 0.2%. In other words, in this country of 9.5 million people, you don't need 1 million to leave. There are about 350,000 people in high tech, another 28,000 or so physicians, another 7,000 or 8,000 senior faculty in the universities. In other words, less than 4% of the entire population is this entire group here. If a critical mass of them leaves, and increasing numbers are, but we haven't crossed a critical mass, if increasing numbers leave, we are in serious trouble. So what's going on here? How could Israel be falling further and further behind? The reason is that there are two countries in one, two nations in one. One is the startup nation. It's cutting edge, it's phenomenal. It's at the top of the world in terms of innovation, and it doesn't need any further introduction in that regard. But there's another Israel. That other Israel isn't receiving either the tools or the conditions to work in a modern economy. That other part of Israel is huge. Not only is it big, but its share in the total is growing. It's like this huge weight on our shoulders, and it's pulling down an entire country for nearly half a century. You can see it on the graph for those who can see it. Think of an engine. We have all the cylinders of the engine, but we're running on fewer and fewer cylinders. We're not operating enough of the cylinders. So to deal with the problem simultaneously, to give people the tools and the conditions to work in a modern economy, clearly will be helping reduce poverty, but we're also going to be growing faster. So what does Israel look like in the education department? And here too, there's a common human tendency to skip, to take shortcuts. So if we look at education very simply, the share of individuals with a tertiary or an academic education in the OECD, Israel's number 4th in the OECD. We have a huge number of Israelis with an academic degree or an academic education. The problem is that a lot of that education isn't worth the paper it's written. I'll get back to that in a moment. Another way of looking at it, how many years of schooling do people have? Prime working age individuals, Israel is at the top of the OECD. We study more than anybody else. But the whole point is not how much time you spend on studying or how many pieces of paper you have, but what you actually know. And what I'd like to do now is show you that. If we look at the relationship between education and economic growth, first, quantity of education, as in, say, years of education where we're really good, and then quality of education, which I'll explain in a moment. If we look at 50 countries over a 40 years time span, those who can see the graph can see that there's not much of a relationship here. There's a very, very slight positive relationship, but what matters is not the quantity of education. What matters is the quality. And one way to look at quality is to see what people know in math, in science, and reading. These are tests that are given internationally every few years. And again, the same countries over this 40-year time period. And you can see, or at least those who can see that there's a very strong relationship here. What matters is what you know, not how long it took you to learn it. So what do Israeli kids know? What is our level of education in math, science, and reading compared to the 25 developed world countries? In the most recent PISA exam that was given in 2018, we are at the bottom of these countries. We have literally the worst education system in the entire developed world. And I need to add a footnote to that, because this does not include the Haredim, Israel's ultra-Orthodox Jews, the majority of whom do not even study the material. We're the only developed world country that does not require a core curriculum from every child. And we enable them to basically deprive their children of a core curriculum, a core education. So the majority don't study it, and therefore they don't take the exam. Had they taken the exam, we would be even worse than what is shown here on the graph, although you can't be worse than last place, you can just have a much lower score. So if we put the Haredim aside, before we put the Haredim aside, who exactly are we putting aside here? The share of Haredim in every generation, say every generation is every 25 years, has doubled every generation. In other words, they're 1.5% of the 95 and 100 plus years old, but they're already 3% of the 75 to 79-year-olds. When we go to the 50-year-olds, we're up to 6%, the 20-year-olds up to 14%, and when we're talking about infants and toddlers, the Haredim, those who are not getting an education in Israel that helps in any way to work in a modern economy, they already comprise 24% of the infants and toddlers. So we're sweeping under the rug here a group that's growing exponentially. And yet, even without them, our education is the worst in the developed world. The secular system, the non-religious Jews, are doing better than most developed world countries, although nothing to write home about. The religious schools, not the ultra-Orthodox, not the Haredi schools, the religious schools are doing worse than the vast majority of developed world countries. And the education that we give our Arab children, it's as though it's not even belonging to the developed world. In fact, if we compare Israel's Arabic speakers, not the Palestinians, I'm talking about Israeli citizens, if we compare them to the predominantly Muslim countries that participated in the same exam, there were 10 such countries. Our children did worse than 9 of the 10 Muslim countries. So when we go to demography here, the children in first grade a year ago, this is the breakup, where 22% of the children are Arab speakers, over a fifth, with achievements below many third world countries. The Haredi kids, most of whom don't even study the material, are also over a fifth, 21% of the children. Those two groups alone are nearly half the children in Israel. And then we have the periphery, the social periphery or geographic periphery. Roughly speaking, about half the children in Israel today are getting a third world education. And those children belong to the fastest growing parts of the population, which is going to make this untenable when they grow up. Children who receive a third world education will not be able to support a first world economy, only a third world economy. But a third world economy cannot support a first world healthcare sector, a first world welfare sector, and it won't be able to support a first world army. And we live in the most violent neighborhood on the planet. If we cannot defend ourselves, it's not that we will become a third world country. We will not be several decades down the road. So it's up to us to get our act together and fix this. If we look at fertility rates, for example, in Israel, you can see that 40 years ago, I'm sorry, there were big gaps between two groups. The Muslims, the Haredim, and the Druze had roughly 6 children per woman, per family. That was the fertility rates. And the other groups were between 2 and 3. Over time, fertility rates in Israel have either fallen or remained constant. You can see, for example, for the Muslims, the fall stopped when we started giving a lot more money to people who had large families because of political considerations, primarily Haredim, but the Muslims also benefited. And so it stopped the decline in fertility. In the early 2000s, a few things happened. First, we stopped giving as much as we had in the past because of a crisis, which I'll talk about in a moment. But also the Muslims became more educated, and that helps reduce fertility. The Christian Arabs in Israel are the most educated Arabs, and they have fertility rates like secular Jews. Who's the outlier here? These are the Haredim. The Haredim were never in any government in Israel, never in any coalition before 1977. But they became the kingmakers basically ever since. They've been in every single coalition, every single year, except for 4 or 5 out of the nearly half century that have elapsed, or 45 years that have elapsed. With that power came money, a lot of money. And with the money, you can see, those who can see fertility rates rising. Within 1 decade alone, the 1980s, the average family, Haredi family, increased by 1 full child. In the next decade, in the 90s, they increased by another half child. Then we had the Intifada. 20 years ago this year, we had the peak of the Intifada, buses blowing up all over the place, major recession, money flowing out of Israel, huge government deficits and debt, and the government budget was slashed, which meant, among other things, benefits were slashed. And that had a major impact on fertility rates. You see it among the Muslims, you can see it among the Haredim. They fell to about 6.6 children per family. And as the money returned, that decline stopped, and we see even a slight increase in fertility among Haredim ever since. So where are we headed? When we look at the children of Israel, in 2015, this is 0 to 14 years old, you can see the breakup of the children. Again, roughly half are getting a third world education. Where are we headed? Well, in about 4 decades, just over 4 decades from now, according to the Central Bureau of Statistics forecast, the middle forecast, not even the extreme one, this is what Israel's children will look like. Half the children, 49%, will be Haredim. Another, just over a third, 35%, will be non-Haredi Jews. These are the ones that actually created Israel, built Israel, defend Israel, and fund Israel. Their children will only be about a third. So Israel's going to be undergoing some major changes. I can tell you right now, this will not happen. I don't know what will. I can give you 2 alternative scenarios. One is we get our act together. Israel has a tendency, when our back is to the wall, to get our act together. We've done it before. We just need to understand that we are in a crisis situation here that will blow up primarily in our children and grandchildren's face. That means, first and foremost, fix the education system. Fix it totally, the entire system, but certainly among those who are getting the worst education. That in turn not only gives them the ability to work in a modern economy, it also tends to affect fertility rates. So this picture will never be like the left-hand column, but at least whoever will live here then will be able to support a first world economy. That's one scenario. It is currently not on anybody's radar. The default scenario is not do anything. Keep talking about Palestinians from morning to night, keep fighting them between right and left and religious and who knows what.
Danny, you need to unmute. Ah, sorry, fixed. Good.
Okay.
You're back. You're back with us.
So I don't know what you heard, what you didn't hear, but in any event, the bottom line is that the default right now is to not fix anything. If we don't fix anything, then good luck keeping in Israel those who currently pay the taxes, most of the taxes, go to the army and send their children to risk their lives. They won't be here. Many of them won't, at least those who can't. 35% is an optimistic prognosis. So I hope that that won't be the case. And then there's another aspect to all of this. We are a small country in size, and already we're the third most dense country in the OECD. However, we are having a lot of children. Fertility rates are like off the charts. I mean, we literally have to reduce the chart here to put Israel in. We have a full child more per family than the #2 country in the OECD, Mexico. Mexico is a third world country. We have a full child more than it, 3.1 versus their 2.1, which means that we are going to become, within just one decade, the most populous or the most dense country in the OECD. And if we don't put the brakes on all of this, according to the forecast I just showed you a moment ago, then we're talking about something else entirely. In fact, if we look at the population forecast forward for all of the OECD countries, then the density in these countries remains relatively stable. Some fall, some rise, but relatively stable. Israel, on the other hand, will literally be saying goodbye to the developed world. We are taking off into the stratosphere of density. And in fact, if we look at who the 10 most dense countries are going to be in 40 years, then this is the club that we will be joining. Basically, some of the world's poorest countries on the planet. So as Groucho Marx said, he didn't want to join any club that would have him as a member. I don't think this is a club that we really want to join. We need to do something about it. We need to do something about it relatively quickly. So I don't think that this is game over. Again, Israel tends to do what it needs to do when it understands it. That's why we created Showish, to be in everybody's face and show them. And I'd like to cite one of the foreign ministers that actually became well-known worldwide, Abba Eban, 1960s and 70s, who said, men and nations behave wisely once they've exhausted all other alternatives. He knew what he was talking about. That's us. When our back is to the wall, only then do we do the right thing. And we have still a lot going for us, even though we already have a brain drain in progress. When we look at the academic ranking of Israel in some of the more important fields, this is by the number of citations per article. We are #2 in the world in computer science, #5 in chemistry, 6 in physics, #10 overall in these fields, even with a brain drain. So we have all the knowledge we need to turn things around. We just have to open the spigots, get this knowledge to all of our children, and get it there tomorrow morning. We have one of the most innovative high-tech sectors or economies in the world. We invest more than any other country, except sometimes Korea, but usually even more than Korea, in R&D. And that means that this innovation leads to a lot of patents relative to country size, say per $1 billion of GDP. You can see that we've surpassed the leading developed world countries, the G7, over a quarter century ago. We remain above them. And when you have ideas, when you're innovative, money flows in, foreign direct investment, venture capital relative to GDP. We are, together with the US, just a multiple of every other OECD country, who are themselves a multiple of every other country in the world. So we have this window of opportunity, no major wars, relative quiet. We're very innovative and money is flowing in. This is serious money by people who are investing in Israel. They're not feeling sorry for us. They're investing because they see a future. And we need to take advantage of this opportunity and get our act together. Because when I said 2 countries in one, this is probably the graph that summarizes it the best. If we take all of the countries with at least 1 million people and sort them on the vertical axis by GDP per capita, living standards, and on the horizontal axis, fertility rates, and then group them. High income countries, you can see here, have relatively low fertility rates, big gaps in income between them, but relatively low fertility rates. The middle income countries, between $20,000 and $40,000 per person. These countries already include some with higher fertility rates. However, there is somewhere to fall for countries that don't deal with their issues. The vast majority of countries in the world are extremely poor. The size of the low-income group is 4 times the size of each of the other groups. And you can see how all of these countries neatly fit into one of these 3 groups, except one, Israel. We haven't made up our mind, where do we belong? We're at the bottom of the developed world with $40,000, roughly speaking, per person, with a huge number of children, huge fertility rates. In fact, if you take the US up there on the top left and drive a line from the US through Israel, you reach Burundi, which is the poorest country on this graph. In other words, Israel is some kind of like a weighted average of a first world and a third world. But the default, unless we deal with it, will be the third world. So we need to start dealing with these issues. We have a demographic, democratic point of no return ahead of us. Things that are already very difficult to pass politically will at some point, the demographics will take over. It'll be impossible to pass them in the Knesset. If we will not be able to defend ourselves, we won't become a third world country, the direction that we're currently headed. As I said earlier, we simply won't be. Okay, now, this is, after all, the bright side. The bright side is something happened in Israel over the past year. The reasons are less important right now, and I don't want this to become a political talk. However, we have now a government that basically encompasses all of the groups in Israel, the right wing, the left wing, the religious, the non-religious, the Arabs and the Jews. We've never had that before. Everyone, nearly everyone has a representative. This is a government, maybe it was created for a different reason, but this is an opportunity, maybe a historic opportunity to fix things. In a way, possibly our last chance. So, who are these new leaders and do they know about all these things? Well, Naftali Bennett, when he was education minister, we showed him a few things when we met with him at the time. Among them, there was a drop in the number of 12th graders, the share of 12th graders taking math at the highest level, 5 units. It fell by about a third within a few years, which is a disaster. And what we found in our studies, among other things, is that when we follow these children over time, the children who are taking math at the highest level, even if they're barely passing or even if they're flunking, they're earning, their hourly wages are similar to those who are excelling at 4 units, the next level down. Those who are barely passing or flunking at 4 units, they're earning basically like people excelling at 3 units. We showed this to Bennett when he was education minister. He stopped us and he told his aides, start taking a picture. And he basically made a video of him explaining our material to teachers and principals and parents. They went on a nationwide campaign and they actually turned things around. In Israel, it is possible to turn things around. He focused just on the math, unfortunately, because we showed him a few other things that we showed him today, but he's the prime minister today. Who else is in government? The other prime minister, the alternative prime minister, Lapid. We've met with him many times in the past. In fact, most recently last week. He took our material and made basically a half-hour TED Talk on it. This is Lapid showing our material in a TED Talk that he put together. He's the alternate prime minister and foreign minister today. Benny Gantz, again, citing our material, he's the defense minister. Chili Trooper, minister of culture and sports. Avigdor Lieberman, the finance minister. All of the top people in government, be they coming from the right wing or center or left wing, they are all familiar with the stuff that we showed you. We showed it to them. We've gone with it publicly and so on. So this is our chance. What are the things that we're trying to emphasize that they need to do? First of all, the things that will move Israel to a sustainable trajectory, high living standards, lower poverty, and basically the ability to defend ourselves. And the second thing is to safeguard these moves. So at the top, the first objective is reform the education system. Give the children the tools that they need and the opportunities that they need when they grow up. That will help them personally. It will help us nationally. And also, we need to overhaul the way that we just throw money at people. And we need a lot of transparency here, because you saw the way things are now, it basically encourages the poorest people in Israel to have high fertility rates, which they can't support. So we end up supporting them. That has to change. The second objective, which is electoral reform and a constitution, basically to lock these things in. I don't want to discuss. I'm not a political scientist. I have ideas in this regard, but that's not what this is about. So to get the findings out, just to give you an idea of what we're doing, Shoresh, we just this year, the past months of 2022, we've, again, I told you about the meeting last week with Lapid, Eyal, my main partner in Shoresh, with the Agriculture Minister Forer, the U.S. Ambassador, all of these people, these are meetings that they request for us to update them. The OECD, when it came to Israel a couple of weeks ago, and missions to Israel, and what I'm doing right here with you today. The more people who care about Israel know about what is happening behind the scenes in Israel and can do something, anything, to help us get our act together and fix it, then spread the word, help other people understand this. If you have questions and comments, I'd be certainly happy to answer. Cynthia will say a few words too, I think, but I'll turn the floor back to Alan. And
Thank you, Danny. I was just looking at that picture of you and Yair Lapid, and I'm thinking it's probably the only country in the world where you can meet the alternate prime minister and he's wearing a black T-shirt. Such informality. Now we'll go to questions in a moment. I've got a few. If anybody has any questions, now's the time to put your hand up. But before we do that, we'll do our little commercial break, and I'll hand back to David for just a moment, and then we'll come to the audience questions.
Okay, thank you, Alan. And as we always do, I ask everyone here to get behind AJA to enable us to do our work and bring you information like you're receiving this evening. Go to the website, jewishassociation.org.au. If you're not yet a member, apply for membership or make a donation. You can also subscribe there to the email list. And for day-to-day updates, like and follow the AJA Facebook page. And just to show you what we're doing next week, we are becoming political next week and providing you with access to one of the political parties that is mobilising for the election, the United Australia Party. We will have their leader, Craig Kelly, together with candidates standing in the areas where the Jewish community is located. Natalie Duma in Wentworth in Sydney. She's part of the Jewish community, has a particularly interesting story, having been raised in Ukraine as a child. And Catherine Reynolds from Goldstein, which has also been in the news a great deal. So that's next week.
Good, thanks, David. And I will also mention that if you're listening on J-Air, this is the Australian Jewish Association Zoom event, which we have every Wednesday night. Our guest tonight is Professor Danny Ben David from the Shoresh Institute in Israel, and we're hearing all about Israel's education system and perhaps how it might be in some sort of crisis. Now, organisations like Shoresh are always looking for support, so I want to now, for a moment, invite Cynthia Roklovsky, the Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Shoresh Institute, to say a few words. And if this issue touches you, and it should, she's the person to contact. So Cynthia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Alan. Yes, I'm Cynthia, and I thank you all for joining us this evening. Special thanks and shout out goes to our dear friend and supporter, Mr. Greg Rosshandler, and to David and Alan and everyone at the AJA team for helping make this event possible this evening. The Shoresh Institution is a policy research center, and we are unique in that we are providing our leadership with nonpartisan evidence-based analyses on Israel's long-term socioeconomic challenges. We provide all of our leadership and our public with this information, as well as to all institutions and organizations around the world who care about Israel's future. In order to remain independent, we take no funding from any governments or agencies in Israel or outside of Israel. So our funding and our work is supported solely by private individuals. Now, I know that what you heard tonight might be somewhat somber, but if it resonates with you and you think it's important and you want to help support our work, we would be most grateful if you would reach out or on our website. And we have our website that will be in the chat as well later on, www.shoresh.institute. I will also, during the Q&A, leave my personal contact details if you're interested in continuing this conversation. I would like to thank everybody for your kind attention and interest in our work, and extend wishes for a very joyful and healthy Passover holiday. Thank you. Pesach Sameach to everyone.
Thanks, Cynthia, and the same to you. Now I've got Joseph Saul and Robert's got his hand up, but just one or two quick ones from me, if I may. Danny, you started off by showing how Israel's productivity rose very quickly and then leveled off. And I'm just wondering, would this not be expected when you go with a new country? In other words, when you go from zero to good, you might expect that to be a very steep growth and then level off. Does that explain it in any way, or are you saying that there's more of an inherent problem there?
So let me go back here to the graph. Let me just show you, rather than just say, because that's a very common perception, and it makes sense. In other words, it's easier to imitate technology and knowledge rather than to innovate. But what happened here? But I'd like to show you why that is not the case. If I will be able to do this, then I will show you. Okay. Here we go. See, in fact, it's part of the original graph, which I removed here. But if you look at 151 countries and you look at where they were initially and their subsequent average growth. So their average income was about $6,000 in 1970. And then their average growth rates for the next 44 years, on average, it was 2%. Now, if what you're saying is borne out by the evidence, we would expect most countries to be either in the top left-hand quadrant or the bottom right-hand quadrant. In other words, the poorer countries should grow faster and the wealthier countries should grow slower. But in fact, there is no such relationship. Okay, it's just most countries on average, whether they're poor or fast, they grow at roughly 2%. There's just a much higher volatility among the poor countries. What happened in Israel was very unique, and it's very important to point it out. What determines economic growth is primarily infrastructure. It's not just the physical infrastructure, it's also the human capital infrastructure. This country that was rationing food and building towns and roads and building the services for an entire population, rationing food, was building universities. By the early 1970s, we had 7 major universities on the ground. We basically reached the number of senior faculty per capita in Israel nearly reached American levels. We did that within 25 years. Nobody does that, okay? This is special. What's happened since the mid-1970s is that the share of faculty per capita in Israel has fallen by 60%. We haven't built another Technion or Hebrew University or Tel Aviv University. We've kind of muddled along with very middling kind of higher education institutions, but we haven't enabled the top. We haven't created, I mean, the country's grown. I mean, we're 9.5 million people. We've grown from 500,000 to nearly 10, but we haven't kept pace with what the founders of Israel understood to be important. We are the people of the book. They invested heavily in education, and we've let that deteriorate tremendously, and we're paying the price.
Yeah. My other question, Danny, was about the high tech sector, and I hear you when you say that there are basically two streams, perhaps running in parallel. But I'm thinking that the kids that end up in the high tech sector, the bright kids that are so innovative, they would have grown up coming through the same education system as everybody else, would they not? So how do you reconcile that?
I'll just skip the graphs in this case, and I'll just answer directly. But they too are getting a really crummy education. However, what happens is that, first of all, the parents, you know what, there is a graph that is important for you to know, to see. So let me nonetheless go back to this, because it's vital. And it's very much related, and it's important in every country, not just in Israel. So it may interest you in general. Here we go. Nope. What happened? The education or the achievement levels of children are highly correlated with the education of their parents, especially the mother. What I'm going to show you here is how strong this relationship actually is. If we look at the 10 countries with the highest scores in the international exams, so the 10 countries that have the best education systems, even there's a strong relationship. So what this graph shows is basically a child whose mother is uneducated or very poorly educated, his achievements or her achievements are going to be 6% below the benchmark child. The benchmark child is a child whose mother graduated from high school, but no more than that. At the other end of the spectrum, we have a child whose mother has an academic degree. That child is scoring 6% above. So you can see that there's an issue here, even when education systems are good. In Israel, these are the gaps. It's gone from minus 20% basically to above 15%. Our system is much, much less capable of dealing with these problems. So when we, I'll stop the share here. So when we look at this and we talk about the people that you're talking about, first of all, they're a handful in Israeli society. I mean, again, 9.5 million. The entire high-tech sector is 350,000, and that includes drivers and secretaries and people that are not cutting edge. Okay, so we're talking about a very small group. That group primarily is coming from parents who are relatively educated. When those parents are educated, they can do two things. A, they can help their children directly overcome what they're getting in school. B, they can live in better neighborhoods, at least in a country with fairly lousy schools. At least their children go to the better schools and they can buy them tutors and so on. And yet, having said everything that I just said, the share of Israeli children who excel in these exams relative to the total number who took it is at the bottom third of the developed world. And that is even misleading because out of those who took it doesn't include the Haredim who didn't take it. So in fact, the share of kids who excel in Israel is very, very low, even when you take out the Haredim. When they reach us at the university, I can tell you that in economics, we accept some of the best and brightest high school graduates. Their levels, their entry levels have been declining anecdotally. We don't measure it, but we've had to lower our introductory courses. Same in the physics departments and other departments. At the other end, however, we don't compromise. So our graduates, those who finish a degree in Israel, in the top departments, they can get accepted to the top graduate schools in America. So, I mean, there is a way to overcome it, but it usually entails having parents who understand the importance of education and can help you overcome the defects of the system.
Sure, thank you. Okay, we'll go to Joseph first, then Saul and Robert. So Joseph, you're unmuted. Please ask your question.
Yeah, hi. It's very disappointing to hear that Israel's children have been dumbed down over the last 20 years or so. But I have two questions. The first one relates to one of the graphs you put up where you showed Israel's fertility rate, I think at 3, like standing way above everybody else. I presume that it also includes the Haredi fertility rate. I'm just wondering what the fertility rate would be if you remove the Haredi equation from that particular graph. The second question relates to the large number of gay population in Israel. A few years ago, I think it was roughly 12% of Israel's population was gay. I don't quite know what the number is now. So I'm kind of surprised to see Israel's fertility rate being so high when there is such a huge gay population there, which is obviously infertile.
Okay, with regard to the fertility rates, first of all, I actually did show, I don't know if you noticed, but I did show a graph that showed the different groups in Israel, their fertility rates. So the Haredim have 6.6 children per family. The religious Jews have about 4, while the secular Jews, the Christian Arabs, and the Druze have roughly 2.1. The Muslims, it's on its way down. So it's roughly, I think right now about 3 or 3.5, I don't remember exactly. So those would be the breakups of the different main population groups in Israel, their fertility rates. As for gays, Israel is actually a very liberal country in that regard. So, well, we don't allow Jews to marry non-Jews, but we have, if you marry abroad or you marry elsewhere, then you can be married, and that applies for gays too. And we also we provide the same benefits to gay couples as far as adopting children and so on, so that and raising children, so that while they can't physically have children in some of these cases, not in all, by the way, but they are not segmented in terms of the benefits that they receive relative to the population at large.
Okay, thank you. Saul, your turn. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much indeed. It was a most interesting talk. And I asked this question actually as a retired classicist. Do you think that one of the problems also is for the decline of education in Israel, maybe more in the arts than in the sciences, but it's creeping, I think, into the sciences as well, the new type of approach that people have of relativism, culturalism, wokeism, where they see in everything racism, ageism, sexism, etc., etc., etc. Incidentally, I remember in 1980, your Dean of Arts at Tel Aviv, Tzvi Yavitz, visited our university and spent a semester in our department. And he looked on our department with contempt. And he asked me, how can you teach ancient history to students who are not familiar with Latin and Greek and at least one modern European language? Come on, you're not serious if you teach students like that. Well, since then, of course, things have deteriorated even further. Are they deteriorating in Israel also because of these problems that now beset society?
Far be it for me to, I'm the last person who could be considered anything remotely expert in the isms that you mentioned, but we do have a certain issue, especially in some of the fields, that, for example, in areas like life sciences or chemistry or things like that, where money by pharmaceuticals is shifting much of the research away from a basic theory and basic research into areas that interest them rather than areas that should basically provide the foundations for the next generation. So there is a problem in that regard. I think it's very much field or discipline specific in many cases, but far be it from, I certainly don't, I'm not an expert in the area that you asked me about. So I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. Robert, have you got some questions from the chat?
Yeah, we've got a few questions, and thank you, Professor. It's very, very interesting talk. So I'll just ask you a couple. What impact does compulsory service in the army have on this whole situation in general, on education and on the economy? And is Aliyah a potential solution? Someone mentioned that we've got now immigrants coming from former Soviet Union that are more educated and perhaps lower fertility rate and things. Is that a potential solution in the future for issues?
Okay, with regard to the army, there are a number of things. First of all, you saw the demographics. The Haredim don't serve in the army, Arabs don't serve in the army, and a good chunk of the religious girls especially don't serve in the army. So when we say that all Israelis serve in the army, that is more how things were similar to the way things were rather than describing the way things are and where we're headed. Fewer and fewer Israelis are going to the army. Then there is the issue of, okay, what do you get in the army? The army does try, and it has quite a bit of success in trying to overcome many of the defects of the education system for kids that come from disadvantaged backgrounds and periphery towns and so on. They do try to help to one extent or in the other. In some cases, if they're willing to sign up, they even help them to get an academic degree to help them through the process. And then there is the group, increasingly so, that is beginning their high-tech careers in the army, in the special, basically high-tech units in the army, which are extremely advanced. You're basically talking about kids, 18, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, that are getting experience that 40 and 50-year-olds don't get elsewhere. And then they go out in the market and they're just gobbled up. So they are getting an education even before the academic education. And many of them even feel they don't even need an academic education because they're all set in that regard. So it depends. Not everyone can get into these high-tech units. You have to get a really good high school education, really good in Israeli comparative standards. And then the army basically helps you attain what else you need for that. So it depends on who, but that's a relatively small group. As far as the Aliyah is concerned, and can it change things? One of the difficulties that we have as economists with trying to explain to our students is the difference between changes in levels and changes in growth rates. Okay, we had a huge influx of immigrants from the former Soviet Union in the 90s. We were a nation of about 5 million that had an increase of about 1 million people from the Soviet Union, about 20%. But that's a level change because they didn't have high growth rates. They didn't have high fertility rates. Basically, what they did is they bought us time that we didn't use to deal with the other issues. And now that's beginning to hit us in the face. Now we are already a country of nearly 10 million people. No one's expecting another million, but even then, 1 million out of 10 million, just 10%, not 20%. And the expectations right now from the government are for about 100,000 to 200,000 people to come to Israel. Again, that will buy us some time, but we basically have run out of time. We need to start dealing with these issues very, very quickly. We can't build on immigrants, not to mention the fact that many immigrants that come to Israel, the second generation doesn't necessarily remain in Israel, especially the more gifted and educated, because of the same reasons many of our own children don't remain in Israel. So if we want a country that our children will live in and that your children can be proud of, that's got to be an Israel that looks quite a bit different, that advances knowledge, that becomes an Ola Goyim, a beacon to humanity, like we view the Jewish people as being in general. And we've kind of moved away from those kind of values in recent years.
Yeah, thanks. Now, I saw Danny had his hand up, but no longer does. If you want to ask a question, Danny, then quickly put your hand up. Just finally from me, Danny, you were talking about the political system, and you made the comment that now that it's a broad brush government, you're hopeful that things might improve. Well, to me, that might even be a bit harder to get consensus amongst so many different streams of politics. Are you saying that there was a problem with previous governments, even though they may have been a bit more uniform? Was there a problem in that they just weren't interested in doing anything about this?
One of the overriding features that has driven Israeli politics for the past half century is that the right wing doesn't want to sit with the left wing, and the left wing doesn't want to sit with the right wing. And so the only way that any one of them can get a majority is to go with the Haredim and basically mortgage our future for political expediency in the present. That aspect of Israeli politics is not present in this government for a change. The right wing is sitting with the left wing, and many of the things that completely divide them, and in the bigger picture, in the geopolitical picture, are not there internally. I know each of these people individually, the differences between Bennett and Lapid and Saar and Gantz and most of the leaders today in government on the issues that we talked about are infinitesimal. That doesn't mean they don't have a political problem, because they do. They don't actually, as of last week, they don't even have a majority. That doesn't mean they can't function, but they need to get their act together. The advantage is, in my opinion, since they cannot come together on anything that's external, this is something where they actually can come together on, because it's something that doesn't really divide between them. So they can argue about the very specifics, but the bottom line is they all get it. They all get it. They all understand it. And each of them alone has told me in the past, well, what do you want me to do about it? Well, now you are together. All you guys are together to do something about it.
Okay, and we'll take our final question from Danny Lamb. Please unmute yourself, Danny, and ask your question.
Thanks very much. And I apologise, I came a little late. I was tied up with another meeting. Medani Ladani, that was fantastic. But I just wonder, I've got grandchildren who are in school in Ra'anana. They're home at 1 o'clock every day. I mean, who runs schools like that? So they're there from 8 or something till 1, and that's the whole thing. So how can anyone expect a serious output in terms of education? And why is it that acceptable?
Why it's acceptable is because no one really wants to deal with many of the interest groups that keep it that way. But the reform that I outlined just in a few bullets at the end of the talk basically focuses on 3 primary categories. One is what the children need to study. We will never come to an agreement on everything, and we don't need to. Everyone wants his children to grow up a certain way. But there are certain things that we know they're going to need to work in a modern economy. That involves a core curriculum that is at a much higher level than what we have, and that is mandatory for every child in Israel, including Haredim and so on. That's number one. Number 2 are the teachers. How do we choose teachers? How do we train them? How do we compensate them? Our teachers are among the worst in the developed world. I'm not just saying that, I'm just skipping the graph here, but their knowledge levels in math and in literature and things like that are below the knowledge levels of the teachers in every developed world country, except Italy in the case of literature. In math, at the bottom. How can we expect people who themselves could never get accepted to a university bring our children up to that level? So we need to turn that thing on its head. And the third leg is how this entire system is run. It's got to be basically a systemic reform. It's not just the hours that you're talking about. Our kids go to school 6 days a week and they come home at noon. Who does that? Nobody does that. This thing has got to change. We give these matriculation exams for decades. but they're not they're not comparable over time, so that they're completely meaningless in terms of usage. So we don't really know, is the education system improving? Is it falling? Their whole system of measurement is inadequate. Their whole system of functioning is inadequate. That's got to change. Again, this is a government that includes two former education ministers, Bennett and Sal. They know it firsthand. They just need to basically, and they can team up with a finance minister, Lieberman, who will be completely on board with this, as will Lapid. This is a government that when you have the triumvirate prime minister, finance minister, and education minister. I don't know, but the people who head his party will all be on board to fix it if they're willing to deal with the primary interest groups in Israel that are holding things up, that look at themselves rather than look at the good of the entire country. So.
Okay, well, it's a very sobering topic, Danny, and we in the diaspora have always thought of Israel as a smart country with a successful education system, but you've certainly raised some issues for us to think about. So for that, I want to thank you very much. Cynthia has put some details on the chat, so please visit the website and follow what's going on, and perhaps you can help them out. So Danny and Cynthia, I do want to thank you again very much for speaking to us. And we hope that you can be successful in some of your goals. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Alan and David and certainly Greg and all of you.
Thank you. Now, of course, this Friday marks the beginning of Pesach for the Jewish community and Easter for the Christian world. So just in closing, I would like to wish all our Jewish supporters a Chag Pesach Sameach. Have a happy Pesach. And our Christian friends a very happy Easter. Just before you go, if you want some more Jewish flavoured entertainment, the L'Chaim program with Morris Klein is now on 3ZZZ FM 92.3. That's all we have for tonight. Don't forget, next week we're back into politics with the United Australia Party with Craig Kelly and the other candidates. Don't forget, you can keep up to date with what AJA is talking about on our Facebook page. So please like it and share widely. But for now, we wish you all a very good evening and look forward to seeing you all next week as usual. So from me, it's bye for now. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.